Good morning, happy Thursday. This is When Life Needs a Detox. It is July 23rd, 2020. My name is Carol White, and I am your life detox strategist. Now, I'm sorry that we got started just a little bit late, and I'm trying to adjust this computer so I'm not looking off kilter. But had to make sure everything was running the way it's supposed to. And well, if you all know me, you know that I don't do well with electronics and what have you, but I do the best I can. Now, before we get started, I wanted to say I got some very interesting comments on last week's broadcast. They weren't what I was expecting, but it was a lot of people that wanted to talk about how I missed certain aspects of the Klan and how they went after the Irish Catholics, how they went after Jews, how they, basically they said I did not hit the pain points of the Ku Klux Klan during the 1920s to 1940s. And the one thing that led me to truly believe, based on the comments, was that these people, although they were concerned, and I have great respect for anyone that comes on and wants to make a comment, they either didn't watch the entire video or they didn't watch the video at all. Either way, you know what? I'm very glad that you want to comment, and I'll deal with whatever comments come up. But here's the problem with racism and with any point of contention, if you just want to be honest. If all you want to do is get your point across without acknowledging or gaining an understanding of the other side, you're never going to resolve the problem. You're always going to have a problem, because if all you want to do is say you're wrong, I'm right, nothing's going to get accomplished. I'm not doing this to rag on anybody. This is history. This is how racism and history interact with each other. So I can't make you watch these videos. Nobody can make you watch them. But if we're going to have a dialogue, I need you to look at the information. That's all I'm saying. Okay. We are on part 3 of the rise and fall and subsequent rise of the Ku Klux Klan. Because if we're talking about racism, there's no way at all we can bypass the Ku Klux Klan. Now, last week we talked about their second rise, how it was affected by the movie The Birth of a Nation, how they expanded and became a nationwide organization, nationally known, how they were all interconnected at this point. We also saw that they became far more brutal, and they went beyond just blacks and Jim Crow. They did go into the Irish, the Jews, the immigrants. If you weren't white Southern, they really had nothing to do with you. They didn't want it. You were a problem. You were an issue. We saw how the Klan was able to become a national force by becoming politically affiliated. We also saw that the Klan imploded simply because of their criminal activity. They also imploded because they had national debt. They were investigated federally, and it helped to disband them in 1939, 1940. Now, the third rising of the Ku Klux Klan started around 1950. But this wasn't national. They were not national anymore. It was mainly in the South, and there were pockets of Klan. They kept the name, they kept the uniform, shall we say, and they basically wreaked havoc all over the South. Now, we talk about them being politically affiliated. Now, in the South, you had Klan. There was the Klan. So the Klan elected their mayors. It was the Klan that elected the governors. It was the Klan that elected their chiefs of police. And it was the Klan chief, the chief of police, who was Klan, who hired his deputies, who were Klan. You couldn't get away from the Klan if you were in the South in the 1950s. Also, what you found was that during the Bull Connor era, the Klan actually joined with the police in quelling riots and protests. So the Klan could act with impunity. They had the backing of the police. The Klan was very, very dangerous. And it's still, at that point was very, very dangerous because the Klan did not believe in talking out a problem. Let's face it. They just didn't. The Klan believed if you were a threat, you were to be eliminated. Plain and simple. They weren't going to talk to you about it. They weren't going to give you a warning. You were just done. Now, with these alliances with the police, they began bombing homes of civil rights leaders and activists. They would use physical violence, intimidation, and outright assassinations. Now, they would, and the thing is, they were all disenfranchised because the Mississippi Klan did things different from the Alabama Klan. Alabama was different from Tennessee. Tennessee was different from Alabama. None of them were aligned with each other. They were not allied with each other. They allied with their law enforcement. Now, there was a report from the Southern Regional Council in Atlanta, says that the homes of 40 Black Southern families were bombed during 1951 and 1952. It says some of these bombing victims were social activists whose work exposed them to danger, but most of them were just people who refused to bow to racist convention or were just innocent bystanders and unsuspecting victims of random violence. And during the 1950s and 1960s, there were, oh my gosh, I'm looking at, oh, wow. 1, 2, 3, 4, about 12 significant murders, or what they call notorious murders, by Klan members. There was the 1951 Christmas Eve bombing at the home of the NAACP activists Harry and Harriet Moore in Mims, Florida. 2 fatalities. I'm not going to read all of them. There's a couple I'm going to read. There was a 1963 assassination of Medgar Evers murdered outside of his home, assassinated by a Byron de la Beckwith, who was never convicted of this crime until 1994. You had another significant one, the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing in September of 1963, Birmingham, Alabama. The four little African-American girls, and it injured 22 people. These perpetrators were Klan members Robert Chambliss, who was convicted in 1977, Thomas Edwin Blanton Jr., and Bobby Frank Cherry, who were convicted in 2001 and 2002. Now, the fourth suspect was a Herman Cash. However, he died before he could be convicted. He got off easy. But there were so many, and they're significant, that they kind of hurt my heart. But during this time, the Klan made it clear, if you stand against us, you die. That was their basic mindset. If you stood against them in any way, shape, form, or fashion, you died. Now, there were newspaper articles written between the 1950s and 1960s. These newspaper editors, the same thing, they were assassinated, or there was violence against them, bombings, the whole 9 yards. Now, with the passing of the Civil Rights Act, it still didn't get better because the Klan was still in control. You see, it's not enough. It's not enough to put legislation into effect and say, you have to do it. Legislation comes through local, federal legislation comes down through local legislation. If the local legislation is planned, how much do you think is going to get done? Now, with the, it turns out that because of the fact that local legislation, which was Klan, wasn't putting any of the federal mandates into play, the Federal Bureau of Investigation had to investigate this. They had to start an investigation. They put informants in the Klan in the early 1960s. So the relationship between law enforcement and the Klan was kind of ambiguous. It wasn't as flat out as when it was in the 1950s. It became a little ambiguous. Now, also the problem with dealing with federal mandates was J. Edgar Hoover, the head of the FBI. He didn't care about enforcing civil rights acts. He was far more interested in dealing with communism. And it wasn't, oh my gosh, I get so worked up. I'm sorry. But you have federal mandates that are supposed to be enacted. It's bad enough that local legislation is not going to put it into effect. But now you have someone who's in charge of making sure it happens, and he's more concerned about a communist threat than what's happening right here. Yeah, the communist threat was real. I get it. But there's a real threat here. You have to deal with everything. You can't just say it'll work itself out. Are you serious? But now you had, going into the 20th century, you had Supreme Court rulings that extended federal enforcement of civil rights. the government had to revive the enforcement acts. And we talked about this in the first part of this series, where in, let's see, let me get my dates right, 1870, 1871, 1872, they brought those laws back, curbing the activities of the KKK. I want to make sure I put all of that in. I did. The enforcement acts. But they had to go back and get information from over 90 years ago in order to quell the activities of the Ku Klux Klan. They were arresting and convicting offenders from the Ku Klux Klan on the enforcement acts, and it was working. Now, you had federal prosecutors that were using the laws on the basis of their investigations and indictments in specifically for the 1964 murders of Cheney, Goodman, and Schwerner. Now, those were the 3 activists in Mississippi that were arrested and then killed by the Klan. Those of you, it sounds familiar, it's the movie Mississippi Burning. It's based on their story. There was also the 1965 murder of Viola Louiso, I'm sorry. But for Viola, Miss Louiso, she was transporting freedom fighters. She was a white woman transporting freedom fighters. She was murdered for doing that. Now, also, when you were looking at the enforcement laws, they were also used in 1991 for the prosecution of Bray versus Alexandria Women's Health Clinic. They Klan member bombed a woman's clinic. I'm pretty sure it was an abortion clinic as opposed to pro-life. And going back, the Klan was investigated by the House of Un-American Activities Committee. So it started putting a spotlight on their front organizations, their finances, their methods, and their divisions. Now, coming into present day, the Klan is still viable. It is. But the Ku Klux Klan is not the only source of racism. We talked about this before. There are, to date, at least another 35 groups that are white supremacists. I included the list in my references because it's just way too much to get into. But now there has been a question going around for the last several years, which is, why can't the Ku Klux Klan be considered or put on the domestic terrorist list? Well, there's no reason that they can't be, because they named them as a terrorist group in 1872. They didn't have a national organization then. They were, as they are now, they're disjointed, they're separated, they're divided. They had no alliances with each other, but the Klan was determined to be a terrorist group, a terrorist organization. But here's the thing. They had allies, legislative allies, i.e., Supreme Court judges that said you can't charge them with federal crimes if all they did was a crime in their own state. You have to understand the Klan is still politically connected. Maybe not as strong, but their ties are there. Why? Because even in the South can still, there are Klan members in the South that can still get police chiefs elected, mayors elected, governors elected, judges elected. Why? Because we refuse to vote. That's why so many senators can stay in office for 20, 30, 40 years. Because we won't vote them out. We're the reason that the Klan can do what they do. We don't vote them out. Also, we tend to want to say, and I saw a video of this on Facebook a couple days ago, and I have absolute respect for Morgan Freeman and Denzel Washington, but when they say that racism doesn't exist, and if you want racism to go away, all you have to do is not talk about it. That's a perspective I really can't get with, because I've never had that mindset. Because for me, and this is just me, this is my personal issue, my personal observations. Dealing with racism, I liken to dealing with weeds in my lawn. If I want a beautiful weed-free lawn, I have to start fertilizing as soon as it becomes warm. Why? Because weeds take hold as soon as it's warm enough for them to germinate. The worst weed of all for me is broadleaf. If you own a home, you know it's that little broadleaf weed that actually networks underground, and they'll pop up everywhere in your lawn. Well, you have to start weeding your lawn from the time it's warm enough to germinate. You have to continue to fertilize and weed and feed your lawn for the entire season. Why? Because if you give a weed a chance to grow, it will take over. It will dominate. And after a while, all you have is a bunch of weeds with grass fighting to survive. And for me, that is what racism is for my country, for my United States of America. It is a weed that must be controlled. If you're going to kill it, you have to be vigilant. If you want to say racism doesn't exist, you have to make it not exist. You just can't hope it goes away. And I'm going on 24 minutes. This is probably the longest that we've had to date as far as these videos are concerned. But I want to thank you guys for hanging out with me and for paying attention. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your attention. And even if you're not watching the video, I appreciate if you want to make a comment. Like I said, I can't make you watch the videos, but if we're going to have dialogue, watch the video and we can talk about whatever you want to talk about. But this ends this week's episode of When Life Needs a Detox. My name is Carol White, your life detox strategist. I love you to the moon and back. I want you to have a wonderful day and an awesome week. And we will meet back here next Thursday, 8 a.m. for more of When Life Needs a Detox and more talk about racism and history. I'll talk to you then. Bye-bye now.